Hello, it's Romanosky from Calgary, Canada. I'm shooting from the Lugnuts facility, and I wanted to do a video on this Hyundai Ioniq 5. And this is our own family car. I ordered it about a year ago after doing some fairly exhaustive research and coming to the conclusion that this one suited our needs the best. And so we got this in August of 2022. It's the end of November 2022. We've had it for about 4 months or so. We've driven it in the 30-degree heat in the summer, and we've also driven it in minus 20 below Celsius weather in the winter. So we've had it on the summer tires and the winter tires, and driven it, as you do in the city and on the highway. So with this use now, I thought I'd wait a little bit, and get some kilometers under our belts before I did the review. Now, the car has been out for more than a year. There's lots of reviews on the Ioniq 5 online, range tests, etc. So I'll try to add my own little personal take on the car and go over what I think are its really strong points and some of the weak ones. I must be said though that I'm very, very pleased with this car. It in many ways is benchmark for a new generation of affordable EVs, which combine efficiency, good range, all the creature comforts that we've been accustomed to, driving aids, and most importantly at a reasonable price. Okay, so we'll go through all of that. I'll turn this camera around, and we'll start with the exterior and interior styling, and we'll go to the EV skateboard chassis, and we'll talk our way through that, the 800-volt architecture of the car and why that's important. We'll go through consumption, we'll go through range, and then we'll do a driving test at the end. So it's an in-depth review of our first 5,000 kilometers on this vehicle. Okay, so thanks for tuning in, and hope you get something out of this presentation. Is the styling, and it's on its winter wheels now, not the 20-inch OEM wheels. They look a little bit out of place, but for winter, the priority is grip, not aesthetics. Most people really like the styling. There's a lot of comments from the other reviewers that the profile looks like a hatchback, but it's actually the size of a small SUV. We also have one of the first Mercedes MLs, and it's about the same footprint, surprisingly. This is a little bit lower, but in terms of width and length, it's actually about the same. So it's quite a bit bigger than you might see in, you might imagine it to be in the photographs. Okay, so the styling generally gets really quite high praise. I find the exterior styling a little bit fussy. We've got this, the origins of it come from the mid-'80s and the Giugiaro designed Hyundai Pony, which gives it its approximate shape, and then it sort of channels this early computer pixels, so you get this sort of pixel theme that gets carried throughout the car, which is kind of interesting. So I've heard it compared as sort of like a Minecraft version of a Lancia Delta Integrale. Anyway, I find it a little bit fussy, like I don't really understand what's going on with the wheel arches and those details. And I mean, I really kind of want to like the exterior styling, but truth be told, I think it's just a little overly fussy. But anyway, that's not the reason that we got the car. I guess the chief reason why I bought this is because the interior really sort of spoke to me in this sort of mid-century modern minimalist aesthetic that really makes the most use of the EV's skateboard chassis and completely flat floors. The wheels are pushed right out to the edges in the car, and the interior space is maximized. And this whole center console unit can slide back and forth, and there's a lot of space, you know, in between the seats, you know, if my wife wants to put her purse there. I like the combination of, you know, some buttons for, you know, the major functions, climate control, etc., as well as the two screens. We can see in the back that the seats can slide back and forth. The rear seats can be adjusted for rake. So the interior of the car is highly configurable. So, you know, we have multiple positions for this part, or the luggage cover. Seats can go back and forth, and we can reconfigure the rear of the car for more luggage if we want to. Our family, we have a 5, 7, and a 9-year-old. We have one child seat that's normally in the car. It's just big enough. We couldn't have a family car that was any smaller than this, but the 5 of us actually fit pretty well. And for the 5 of us to fit in a vehicle with a footprint this small means that every inch of interior space needs to be as efficient, or it needs to be laid out as efficient as possible. So that was the main reason that we selected this car. And I just really like the simplicity of the interior. You know, some of the other EVs have just one screen and no buttons at all, and that's kind of neat, but I prefer a few buttons. And I really like the way that they've taken the skateboard chassis and made the most of it with this completely flat floor. Okay, so I like the materials. There's a nice ambiance in the car, and it's well matched to the EV being a really quiet and smooth machine. So driving it's a real pleasure. So I like the interior a lot more than I like the exterior, but I don't mind driving a distinctive car, and it certainly is that. At night it lights up really nice, you know, with this whole center bar illuminating. And it's maybe it's growing on me a little bit. Okay, so that's the styling, interior and exterior. I'll show you what's in the front. A lot of EVs don't have a front trunk. It's packed full of power electronics, and this one is too. You know, we have the cooling for the battery and the electronics. This here is for the windscreen, and then we've got the brake master cylinder and the low voltage 12-volt battery there. This does open, and the car comes with the 120-volt charger. Okay, so this will charge your car up to about 1.5 kilowatts. That going into a 77 kilowatt hour battery means that it would take 60 hours or something like that to charge it from empty using this cord. But if you're just replenishing 10 kilowatts or 12 kilowatts, which might get you 50 or 60 kilometers, it will do that overnight. We drove this car for the first few weeks using this charger because our level 2 7.5 kilowatt 240 volt wall box wasn't installed yet. So surprisingly, we actually could get by with just the 1.5 kilowatt 120 volt charger, but that's because we just didn't drive that much. Now this device here is not standard with the car. This needed to be purchased separately, and this is a vehicle to load adapter, and I'll show you what you do with that. Vehicle to load means that the car can provide electricity, okay, at the rate, I think, of 3 kilowatts. And so this will plug in here, like so, and now we have a plug for 120 volt accessory. Okay, so that is pretty cool. Not very many cars have that capability. In addition to this vehicle to load plug-in, there is another one that lives down here. Let me just get it for you, okay? And you can also plug in a device there. So I think it gives you, yeah, see, it's 120 volt and 15 amps. So that'll give you about 1.5 kilowatts out of this plug and 1.5 kilowatts out of that plug for a total of 3 kilowatts. So you can park this car and have it dispense 3 kilowatts of electricity. And, you know, if you started with a, you know, 77 kilowatt hour battery pack, you know, that's like 25 hours that you can get, that this car can power something. So it could be used as backup in, you know, if your home electricity is cut off and you need to power your fridge or your freezer, you could plug it into the car here, and that would keep the fridge going for probably a week or something like that. So that is a pretty cool feature of the car. Okay. And I think I paid the dealer marked it up a lot. I think I had to pay like $500 for that thing. Now, we have lots of adjustment in the front seat, and we have this cool pedestal which you can pull out if you're. I guess the idea is if you're charging and you want to lay down, and also, you know, these seats recline almost to flat, so you could take a nap if you wanted to. Okay. Interior of this car is really, really nicely done. I gotta say, I'm very impressed with it. The other kind of neat thing about it is the sunroof hinges, or this big sunroof hinges in the center and pulls out from the center, and I'll demonstrate that. So just to do a deeper dive into the range, consumption, battery size, etc. It's a little technical, so I'll sort of rifle through all these numbers here. I have a much more detailed presentation of an EV seminar that I did that I'll provide a link to it. So if you really want to understand all these numbers and have 2.5 hours to go through this, I'd really highly recommend that. There is a lot to the EVs, and it does require some study and some effort to be, you know, fully conversant on all the units and measures. But let me just do my best here to summarize the Hyundai. AC charge from the home. Okay, so you'll if you want to use the Hyundai 120 volt cord and charge the car, it charges at, you know, if you have a 15 amp breaker and it's 120 volt, watts equals amps times volts. It's about, you know, 1.8 kilowatts. You take 80% of that because that's the maximum you should draw out of any one circuit. The electrical code, you charge the car with a normal household cord, you know, like that on the wall there, and get 1.5 kilowatts out of it. That's the output of power out of the wall. Okay, so that going into the car, 1.5 kilowatts, and you're going into a 75 or 77 kilowatt hour battery pack. So it's 1.5 into 77, or the portion of the battery that you've used up. Okay, so if you use 15 kilowatts, you know, which will take you, you know, 70, 80, 90 kilometers, something like that. If you use 15 kilowatts and you charge it at 1.5 kilowatts, that's 10 hours. Okay, so you can use the 120 volt plug, giving you 1.5 kilowatts for, if you plug it in for 10 hours overnight, you'll replenish your car 15 kilowatt hours. Okay, hope that makes sense. 1.5 kilowatts for 10 hours is 15 kilowatt hours. All right. Now, how long are you going to be able to drive with 15 kilowatt hours? Okay, well, this car has 5,000 kilometers on it. My average consumption from the beginning is 20 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. Okay, that means if you put 15 kilowatt hours in the car, you'll go, 3/4 of 100 kilometers, or 75 kilometers. Okay, so if you drive 75 kilometers and you use if you use 20 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, you're going to be using 15 kilowatt hours for 75 kilometers. If you want to put in 15 kilowatt hours in your car and you do it at 1.5 kilowatts, it's going to take you 10 hours. Okay, so you can do that, and we did do that for the first couple of weeks we had the car until our fast charger arrived. But what you probably want is a level 2 charger. Okay, so a level 2 charger uses 240 volts. Okay, watts equals amps times volts. So depending on the amperage circuit at 240 volts will determine the kilowatt output from the plug. I know it's confusing. See my longer video and get a pen and paper and you'll be able to figure it out. It's not that hard, but when you get thrown a bunch of units and measures at you, it can be a bit difficult. But anyway, if you put a 30 amp service in, it's 30 times 240 times 0.8. If you put a 40 amp service in, it's 40 amps times 240 times 0.8. If you put a 50 amp service in, 50 amps times 240 volts times 0.8. And you'll get at the plug, anywhere from like 6 to 11 kilowatts. That's level 2, 240 volt charging. You'll need a charge box for that. You buy those for $500 or $1,000. You can get them on Amazon. Okay, so that's the wall box, and those produce, depending on the way you've wired it, anywhere from maybe 6 to 11 kilowatts. The car has a maximum amount of AC power that it'll accept. It happens to be 11 kilowatts. That's competitive. That's what most EVs are now. They're 11 kilowatts. Some of the earlier EVs can be 3.6 kilowatts or 6.6 kilowatts or 7.2. And there's a few new cars that can go all the way up to 19 kilowatts, like the Ford Lightning, okay? But most new cars, most new EVs accept 11 kilowatts, okay? 11 kilowatts would correspond to a 60 amp breaker at 240 volts times 0.8, which will give you around 11 kilowatts as well, okay? For us, it was expensive for us to go over 40 amps for various reasons. So we stuck with a 40 amp breaker, 240 volts, 80% for a safety margin, and we get 7.5 kilowatts out of the wall box, okay? So when we drive our normal day and we put 75 kilometers on the car and we use 20 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers and we go 75 kilometers, that means we're using 15 kilowatt hours to go our 75 kilometers. And if we're charging or replenishing our car with 15 kilowatt hours and we're giving it 7.5 kilowatts, that's 2 hours. What this means is we charge our car every night for 2 hours at 7.5 kilowatts. We put in the 15 kilowatt hours we need to replenish the battery, and then we're good to drive another 75 kilometers the next day, and we repeat. Okay, so that's our routine with 75 kilometers a day, 2 hours of level 2 charging at 7.5 kilowatts using a 40 amp breaker. So I hope that makes sense. Okay, occasionally we'll go somewhere on the highway. So now we're going to charge it at DC. Okay, these are the fast chargers. It's complicated. DC charging, there's a whole bunch of variables. It's almost impossible to know if the station you're going to roll in at works, what power it's going to give you, what power it can give you, what power the car is going to accept, and it's heavily dependent on temperature ambient temperature, temperature of the battery pack, and a whole bunch of other factors. And if you really want to get into it, it does require a bit of a deep dive. It'll charge differently at different charging stations, depending on their output, also dependent on whether the charging stations are 400 or 800 volt. This car can accept a very high rate of charge, but the highest rate of charge are only at 800 volt stations. These are Electrify Canada or Electrify America, okay? So all the biggest charge stations, the 350 kilowatt charging stations that you see, well, they aren't necessarily 800 volt. They could be 4 or 8, and there's a big difference as to how fast the car will charge at an Electrify Canada 350 kilowatt station versus a Petro-Canada 350 kilowatt station because of the different voltages. I know that's kind of confusing. Bottom line is that when you roll into a DC fast charge, you know, you might expect 100 to 120 kilowatt average over 20 to 80% state of charge. Again, you'll have to see my longer video to get that explained in more detail. But what that means is that, you know, this car will use 20 kilowatt hours to maintain 100 kilometers an hour on the highway, okay? 20 kilowatt hours, or 20 kilowatts will keep it in motion at about 100 kilometers an hour. 20 kilowatt hours will give you 100 kilometers worth of range, okay? So the car uses 20 kilowatts to go somewhere on the highway, okay? And you can accept charge at, you know, 100, well, all the way up to 240 kilowatts. But if you're taking an average charge at a DC station, the charge rate varies all over the place, and you might only average 100 or 120 kilowatts throughout the charging station. But even if it's at the lower amount, and let's say it's 100 kilowatts, the car uses 20 kilowatts to drive somewhere at 100 kilometers an hour, you can charge it at 100 kilowatts average, okay? And so what that means is you can drive for 5 hours, or the ratio is driving 5 to 1. So if you drive 5 hours, you're going to charge for 1 hour. And that's pretty good. And it can be a lot faster than that, but that is class leading. And you generally, you know, some cars are down to 2. You drive 2 hours, you charge for 1 hour, okay? The very, very, very best, most expensive cars like a Lucid or something like that might let you, in perfect conditions with a perfect charge, might let you drive 9 hours to charge for 1, a 9 to 1 ratio. Not that you could drive 9 hours because it doesn't have that much range, but the ratio of charging to driving is like 9 to 1. It's very high. This one gets up there. I mean, you can probably count on 5 to 1 in good conditions, 6 to 1, something like that. So very, very good. And that is going to make the difference in your point-to-point times driving over distances. Is going to be, it's not about range, how fast you're going to get somewhere or cover a distance in a certain amount of time. It's about your charge rate at the charging station versus the expenditure of that charge, which is consumption when you're driving. Okay, and this car nails it for that. So that's the takeaway, even if that's a bit confusing, is that its consumption's low, 20 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. Its charge rate is high. That means less time charging, more time driving. And, you know, we get range of about 400 kilometers out of this car. So we have a 77 kilowatt hour battery, and we've got consumption of around 20 kilowatt hours. 20 into 80 is around 4 times 100. That's where you get the 400 kilometers of range for it. In the summer, we see 16.5 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. So the range goes, you know, closer to 500. In the winter, we see the range drop to 25 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. Okay, so that would be closer to 300 kilometers worth of range. Okay, so it differs between 3 and 400 kilometers of range depending on the temperature. So that is characteristics of all EVs. Okay, so anyway, that's the range, capacity, consumption, DC charging. which is excellent for this car and best in class, shared with the other Hyundai e-gmp vehicles, which is the Kia EV6 and Genesis EV7. I hope that's not too confusing. Again, see my much longer detailed seminar on EVs if you really want to get a full understanding of it. Okay, well, let's take this Hyundai Ioniq 5 out for a drive. I'll take my iPhone and I will store it with the cubby here, which has inductive charging. And I will confirm that I am the driver and not my wife. And we will start the car and select drive here. So clockwise or forward is drive and reverse is anti-clockwise. I see that this car has traveled just about 5,000 kilometers. The average consumption is 19.9 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. The last trip was 18.2. The weather's actually pretty nice. In really cold weather, it'll get up to about 25. The first 20 kilometers of minus 20 degrees Celsius, when the car is warming itself up and warming up the battery pack, I can see 35 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. But then as you drive it, the car warms up over a longer distance. It sort of settles at around 25 if it's really cold out. Keep in mind we have snow tires on the car and the weather's cold, okay? Today, you know, it's it's about plus 1 or 2 degrees Celsius. And so I've got an average here of 18.2 kilowatt hours for the last 40 kilometers, okay? So lifetime, we got the car in August. It was hot, 30 degrees. I saw 16 and a half. The worst weather we've seen so far, which is minus 20, I get 25. And the lifetime of the car is 19.9. Okay. We'll decide what mode we're going to be in and what the level of regenerative braking is. So I can be in the eco mode, normal mode, or sport mode. The dash changes depending which one I'm in. So I think it's about 160 kilowatts, if I'm not mistaken. That's, you know, maybe 225 horsepower or something like that. And the front motor chips in another 80 horsepower for I think 320 total system horsepower. We've got the sunroof that's open, and it's a wonderfully airy and spacious cabin with a completely flat floor, movable center console, movable rear seats for distance, also for rake. Lots of headroom. I'm 6 feet tall, six and a little bit, and I've got lots of headroom. I've got lots of space in this car. This feels like a premium car. It doesn't feel like a cheap car. It feels like more than the $63,000 that I paid for it. You know, the materials are kind of eco-friendly. I'm not sure what's leather and what's synthetic or not, but it's all very pleasing. And at night it lights up really nice too. Okay. We have USBs. We don't have the USB-C, which I know some people have commented on that it should have, but my devices are older anyway, so it doesn't seem to make any difference. And we've got lots of USB chargers, and then the inductive charger and USBs for the back. So we've got lots of chargers for your EVs. Okay. The steering wheel is nice. We don't see a Hyundai badge, just the 4 little pixels, which is the design theme that's carried out throughout the car. And I think they wanted to make the Ioniq kind of one step above the Hyundai, and are really making Ioniq into the brand and not necessarily Hyundai, to differentiate it a bit. Okay. So we'll pick our drive mode, and I usually just go in eco, and then our brake regeneration. So that's done by these paddles on the steering wheel, and I've got I pedal, or I can go down level 1, 2, or 3, or I pedal. Okay, and I'm going to go to I pedal, and that gives me basically one pedal driving. I don't normally even use the brake pedal, not even to hold myself on hold myself on a hill or anything. You just use one pedal when it's in that mode. A little bit of caution though, when you use cruise control and you go off of cruise control and you have a high level of brake regeneration and you're used to driving without your foot on the accelerator and you just hit the buttons to disable the cruise, all of a sudden the car really brakes fast because you have a high level of regeneration. So that's something to look out for. Either put your foot on the accelerator or before you go into cruise, put the brake regeneration at its lightest by using the negative paddle. Okay, so that caught me out a little bit, but okay, so let's get going. The car is, we see the heads-up display, and there's various options for sort of augmented reality on the heads-up display if you prefer. And the car makes almost no noise. It's very quiet, and it's actually quite a lovely thing to drive. Just the faintest of whine from the EV motors, and it's very smooth. So I've been fooling around with the drive modes with this Hyundai Ioniq 5, and I realized that I missed a couple of things. So what I'd like to do is splice this little bit of coverage in. Now you'll notice I'm wearing a puffy jacket, and it's much colder. It's like minus 20 degrees and below 0 Celsius. And so it's a good day to test some of these things. Also, something that I didn't find earlier was this screen on the dash here. And this gives you the torque split of the front and rear axles, and there's a little pictograph that shows that. So let's take this drive home, and I've got my kids in my car, and they promised me that they were going to be quiet and let me do this video. I had to bribe them a bit, so hopefully I won't have to redo this. But let's go and let me explain these drive modes in this Hyundai for you. Okay, so I'm going to put it in the eco mode where I normally am. For the best fuel economy. Okay, and then I'm going to hit the mode button, which is on my right hand, and then I get this pictograph, and it shows the battery energy in the center, and then it shows the the forwards. Okay, so we go into drive, and I am in eco mode now. In this screen, I've got eco, normal, and sport. But what I didn't get before is there's an extra snow mode. And the way you get into snow mode is you take the drive button and you hold it for 3 seconds. Now it says snow, and it shows you snow down there. And that's something it's not intuitive, and I did read the manual, but somehow I didn't pick that up. If I hit it again, I go back into normal, and it kicks you out of snow mode, okay? So it says hold drive mode, and there's a colon, and it says snow. So what that means is you are in eco, normal, or sport, and you hit that by this drive mode button on the steering wheel here, and you can see me going eco, normal, and sport, but it doesn't get to snow. To get it to snow, you hit the drive and hold this, and now it comes up with snow, and now you get the snow letters at the bottom, and it loses that default, at least in certain circumstances. And the snow mode, as we're about to see, is actually pretty important when it's minus 20 below. Okay, so I'm in eco mode, I'm turning the corner, and it's actually giving me 4-wheel drive, but not very much. And now I'm in rear-wheel drive, and I'm staying in rear-wheel drive. And I'm coming up to a right-hand corner now, and let's see what it does. It's very slippery. It's like minus 20 degrees, okay? And so now I'm going to put a lot of power down in this corner. Normally it's a rear-wheel drive car. You can feel it fishtail a little bit. And I'm getting just a little bit of power to the front axle, which is interesting. And now that disappears. It wasn't obvious to me before that any power was going to the front axle in eco mode, but I guess it does do that. All right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the mode to normal. Now I can feel the second electric motor kick in, okay? There's a bit of a jolt from the powertrain, and I felt it at least engage the front motor and the front wheel drive. And we'll see what happens now. My little pictograph here shows that it's, well, going on and off for front wheel drive. Yeah, when I take my foot off the brake, then it will engage front wheel drive. So in normal mode, it's starting off in all-wheel drive. In eco mode, it started off in rear wheel drive, but when I got some slip, it gave a little bit of power to the front wheel drive, okay? Now you can see I've got, like, 3 bars or whatever on the front. Although it's still heavily rear wheel biased in terms of the torque. So in normal mode, or in eco mode, and in normal mode, it'll start off in rear wheel drive, but the intervention of the front motor, which is an extra 70 kilowatts, is delayed. Okay, so I'm in normal mode, and I've got about anywhere from 10 to 30% to the front axle. Okay, and then when I'm going down the hill a little bit, it's only the rear axle. So both those modes will use front wheel drive, although it's sparingly. Okay, so let's see what happens when I go into sport mode. Everything turns red, and let's see what happens now. So my pictograph says I'm running both motors. I believe in sport mode, both motors run all of the time. And let's have a look at that torque split and see what happens. And it looks to be equal. So I've got equal amount of power going to the front and the rear axle. Okay, so that's interesting. What happens when I go and I hold this and I go into snow mode? Okay, another jolt from the screen, and I also have four-wheel drive, 2 motors running all of the time. Okay, so in eco mode and normal mode, the front wheel drive is activated, different percentages depending. In eco mode, the intervention of the front wheel drive is less than in normal. Okay, so that's the difference there. Obviously the front wheel drive and the 2 motors consume more electricity, so in eco mode it's a little bit more reluctant to engage the front wheel drive. In normal, you get the 2 motors and all-wheel drive coming on more easily. In the sport mode, all 4 wheels, or both axles, get the same amount of power, front and rear, and the same thing happens in winter mode. So winter mode and sport mode have equal torque distribution to the axle. Eco mode and normal mode have varying degrees of torque to the front axle. Okay, so then what is the difference between sport and snow? My understanding is that the mapping of the throttle and the accelerator and the brake pedal is a little bit softer when you're in snow mode. Also, I want to check something with brake regeneration. Right, so when I'm in snow mode, it keeps my brake regeneration at level 1, which is the least amount of brake generation. What that means is there's the least amount of retardation from the front electric motor trying to charge itself, which means it's effectively a brake. So in snow mode, it goes to level 1 regeneration and stays there, and does not allow me to set the level of the brake regeneration. If I go into sport mode, it dumps me out of snow mode. I go into sport, it shows it there, and now I can set the brake regeneration. Okay, so sport allows you to change the intervention of the brake regen, and snow mode doesn't. Okay, so that is important. Something to also consider is that when I'm in normal mode, if I need more power, or if I'm in eco mode and I need more power, the car just will not give it to me. And I'm in eco mode now, and this car is just not going anywhere. It's very, very icy. Okay, so what are the what are the takeaways here? Well, the takeaway is you need to check to see if you're in snow mode, because the car might not necessarily keep that setting. Okay, you know what? We might as well just try this here. I'm gonna pull over, and we're in snow mode now, and I'm going to put it in park. I'm going to shut it off. I'm going to start the car again. We are going to go back, and we are go into drive. It's telling me I've got one tire a little bit low because it's really cold out, and the tire pressure is lowered because of that. And the mode I'm in, it does not say snow. No, so it didn't keep that. It didn't keep that setting when I turned the car on and off again. Okay, so that means that in the winter time, when you are turning the car on and off, each and every time you're going to have to go into it and select the snow mode, which isn't intuitive or obvious. I would call that a programming oversight, or even as much as a design flaw. In my opinion, the way these cars should work is that the default setting should always be the safest and the most economical. So I understand it going to eco mode as a default. Okay, I understand that. But when it's a safety item, and I would consider activating the all-wheel drive in treacherous conditions a safety item, you would think that snow mode, or at least give you a big warning, say it's icy, do you want snow mode, or give you a big warning saying your traction might not be optimized for snow or whatever. I would say that should be in the car, and it isn't. I would also say that if the car detects excess amount of slip from the rear wheels, that it should trigger something, at least a warning, to ask you if you want to go into a different mode. Okay, so the car should be able to tell you, when the wheels are trying to spin, because it limits power if the wheels are trying to spin. If it detects that, well, the obvious thing for it to do would be to ask you if you wanted to go in snow mode, which diverts half the power to the front wheels. Okay, so I don't know why the car doesn't do that, and that means that it is possible for you to get caught out if you just get in the car and drive, and you wonder why your car's not going up a hill, or why the car isn't accelerating, and so on. Okay, so that I don't understand why they didn't do that. The other thing is that when you're in eco mode, you're basically it'll limit power basically just to the rear axle, from what I can gather. If there's a little bit of slip, it'll send some power to the front axle, but it'll limit the total power. Like, for instance, if you're driving at 70 kilometers an hour and you floor it, let's say you need to make a passing maneuver or a merge or something like that, it won't give you the power, no matter, even if you floor the accelerator. Other cars have like a detent or something in them, where if you push the throttle pedal past a certain amount, then it'll give you full power. And this car doesn't do that. If you want full power, you have to hit the drive mode, and you have to hit it in sport. That can catch you out, because there might be an instance where you're trying to make an evasive maneuver, you're trying to execute a pass, you're trying to do something, and the car is unresponsive. Okay, so those are two things that I think they could have done better. And I would say for the Ioniq 5 owner, which presumably is the same for all the e-gmp platform cars, that you have to pay really close attention to what your mode is and make sure you're driving in the correct mode for the conditions. And also, I'll do one last test here. I'm just on an icy residential road. I'm going to stick it in eco mode, and we're going to go and look at, so we'll get back to this and let's just see what happens. We've got an icy road and we've got it in eco, and now we're going to floor it and see what happens. So foot to the floor, and we're not going anywhere. It is giving us a little bit of power to the front axle. Okay, let's try it again. We'll stop and we'll go in normal mode. Change the mode to normal, and let's see what happens now with our little pictograph. Okay, so we get full power to the front axle and we fairly dramatically take off. So both eco and normal will put some power to the front axle, but you go a lot faster in normal. Let's try sport mode now. Get our little pictograph back and let's see what happens here. Yeah, full power to everywhere, and we take off hard. And the last one we'll try is the snow mode, and a little bit of a corner here, and we'll do exactly the same thing, and we'll watch what happens on our little pictograph. Yeah, so it's a little bit less, a little smoother. So it's mapping the throttle differently. It's managing the power to the front and rear axle. It's giving you less torque and a smoother delivery of power than the normal or the sport. So that's the difference then. We've got effectively 4 modes in this car, but only 3 of them are on the toggle. We have the snow mode, which you have to press and hold. Each of the modes will divert some power to the front axle. It's primarily a rear-wheel drive. The torque split and how much power it gives how soon differs between the modes. Eco and normal, you get a varying torque split to the front. The intervention of the front axle is delayed a little bit more in eco for better economy. In sport mode and snow mode, you get equal torque to each axle, but the throttle mapping changes with those modes, and it's a little bit smoother and more progressive in snow mode. So I hope that makes sense, driving your Hyundai Ioniq 5 and what these modes do. Again, the takeaway is the car doesn't remember what mode you're in. Each time you start it, you need to make sure you're in the correct mode, and it has a fairly profound effect on the performance of the car in the winter driving. Okay? The controls have nice tactile feel. You know, the signal lights make nice noises, and it's got all kinds of driver aids. So it's going to have surround view cameras on the front bumper and on the mirrors and on the rear. Okay. It also has a camera in the windscreen, shooting forward. It also has ultrasonic parking sensors, and it has 5 radars, 3 in the front and 2 in the rear. So there's like sensors everywhere in this car. You would have the camera, which reads the white lines for self-centering on the road. Okay, that's in the center of the windscreen. You would have the cameras on the mirrors. Now notice when I signal, you get the view behind you from this camera here in the mirror for your blind spot. So you not only get blind spot warning for the beep, but you also get a special circular view of this camera facing rearward. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. And then you have, of course, a rear view camera when you back up. The heads-up display gives you the speed limit and your speed, and if you go over the speed limit, it turns red. Okay, and then if you want to engage any of the driving aids, the lane self-centering, or the cruise control, or the adaptive cruise control, or the hands-free steering, then you use these buttons here. So when I pull onto the highway, I'll hit lane centering, I'll hit cruise control, I'll hit adaptive cruise. All three of those icons then show up on the hands-free, and I'll have a green light, like a green steering wheel, if the system can read the white lines on the road and be able to center the car in those lines. In conditions in Calgary in the winter, often those white lines are obscured, and so I'll lose it, and then the green light turns white, and I know that's not working anymore. And you know, it happens quite a bit. So this isn't a car where you can take your hands off the wheel and just let it drive. The driver aids work well, and I use them. I don't take my hands off the wheel. I put on all the driver aids. Just because I think there's some important safety benefits there. If I miss something, the car will get it. But I don't really let the car drive itself. You know, odd occasion on the highway, I might do that. But the technology isn't really quite there. But if I get up to speed, now I can hit the lane self-centering. I get a little green steering wheel. I can hit the cruise control. And I can set that with the thumb screw. So this one's at 82. I can hit the adaptive cruise, and now I can set the distance, you know, how far I want to be behind the car. All this stuff lights up on the instrument. I'm getting various warnings when somebody's in my blind spot, and now the car is driving itself. I see the green steering wheel, so it's self-steering. If I leave my hands off the wheel or put really light pressure on the wheel, the car will tell me and give me the warning, okay, to make sure that I'm paying attention. But what I normally do is I'll set all this stuff on the highway. I'll still keep my hands on the wheel, and I'll keep my foot off the accelerator, and I'll just let the car do its thing. But I'm still, you know, monitoring everything very closely while letting the car do its self-steering and lane centering and adjusting the distance. Okay, so that's normally the way that I drive the car. I don't take my hands off and play with something and just hope the car figures it out, because there's too many instances where the road conditions are such that the car just can't do that, and it doesn't take much for the self-centering to conk out because it can't read the road. Also, sometimes it's a little bit confused and it goes from side to side quite a bit. If I want to accelerate, I can bump up the speed, and I can see that. It always gives me a warning triangle in the heads up that there's somebody in my blind spot. I get a warning triangle in the mirror that somebody's in my blind spot. On the dash here, I can see my speed. I can see the speed limit. It's red because I'm going 86 and the speed limit is 80. And then I get my instantaneous consumption and average consumption. So at this speed, which is 84 kilometers an hour, you know, I'm getting, you know, around, you know, 18 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. If I look at my electric vehicle screen, you know, I can see somebody cutting in front of me and the car brakes. There's a little kind of cloud that tells me that the car is attaching itself to somebody and using that car. So it's quite interesting to monitor all this and see what the car is doing. But like I said, the car's not quite there yet. If I can go into a menu and get my electricity use, which I think is kind of interesting. In this case, it says my drivetrain is taking up 90% of the power, and it varies between, you know, 10 and 20 kilowatts. The electronics are taking, you know, usually they take about 0.5 kilowatts, and usually the climate control takes about 2 kilowatts. I had the car indoors, so I actually don't have the climate control on. So if I do that, and let's just say I turn on the seat heater, and I turn on the steering wheel heat, and I give the passenger their seat heater, and I go in the rear and turn on the seat heaters there, and then I go to the fan speed, and I turn on the fan speed, what happens to my electrical use? So I'll go back in, and now I'm using 0.5, 0.6 kilowatts. I see it mostly in the 2 range, so, and it's climbing to almost 1 kilowatt now. Okay, so it's interesting to see how the car uses the electricity and what the climate settings and so forth do for the overall power consumption. And normally it's about 2 kilowatts with consumption of 20 total, so maybe 10% of it goes to climate. When I've done further analysis on EVs, what I've found is that about a third of the power goes to overcoming the rolling resistance, which is a function of the weight of the car and the tire size and compound, which actually makes quite a big difference. Low rolling resistance tires versus performance tires versus winter tires, and then the tire diameter and the width. The wider tires have greater rolling resistance and worse aerodynamics too. So about a third of the power to power an EV is overcoming rolling resistance, and this is a fairly linear function. About a third of the power goes to overcoming air resistance or aerodynamic drag. Aerodynamic drag is going to be a function of the shape of the car and the frontal area. This isn't linear. This is an exponential function. The drag varying by the square of the speed. So depending on the aerodynamics of the car, the speed makes a great impact on the range. For the most aerodynamic cars, not as much, although still exponential. But on something like a truck, an EV truck, it would make a really substantial difference. This guy's just cutting in front of me here. Somebody's cutting in front of him, and he's going the other way, and he's cutting back in, and the car is going back and forth to decide who it's trying to follow. And it's actually doing a pretty good job of it. This is a fairly busy freeway, and I still have all my driver aids on, and the car is actually behaving pretty good. Okay, that was a confusing situation. I had 2 people from different lanes all trying to cut in front of me, and then deciding that they were going to back out of the maneuver and go back and then go forward again. Okay. So anyway, the EV will use about a third rolling resistance or friction, a third overcoming the aerodynamic drag, and the rest of the third goes to power losses, climate control, and maintaining the heat in the battery, because the battery needs to be kept within a certain window to be efficient. Now this car, a lot of EVs, if you signal, the car will change lanes for you, and this one doesn't. If I put on the signal light, it kills the lane guidance. And now it's yelling at me. All right. So if it won't change lanes by itself. I know the Teslas will do that, and this one doesn't. It'll also fight you a little bit. I mean, if I decide I want to turn here but don't signal, well, the car's not very happy. I don't know why. I think anytime I change lanes, it cancels the steering, and now it's picked the steering back up again. So it's a little fussy. Try to understand what it's doing, and it's about to drive me into the curb. So it's not really that reliable in situations like this. You really do have to keep driving the car, and the active steering kind of fades in and fades out. Warnings appear from various places. Some situations it works well. Others, it'll drive you straight off the road. Okay, so you just can't leave it alone. That said, I'm quite happy to let the car do most of the work and just rest my hands on it. And I find it interesting to monitor what the car is doing rather than drive the car. So I'm driving the car, but what I'm really doing is monitoring the systems. And that would be the same way that you fly a modern airliner. aircraft. The plane flies itself. You monitor the systems and make sure everything's working properly. So I find it interesting to let the car do itself. And you might ask, well, why not just drive the car? Is that novelty or not? But I think that it reduces fatigue if you let the car do the work. Also, I think that there are situations where you might be distracted and the car might pick up on something before you do. So I think that you'd probably safer to let a situation where you have the best of both worlds, where you're paying attention and your hands are on the wheel and you're active in driving the car, but you leave the car with all the driver aids, so it might pick up something you miss. So that you have some limitations as a human, being distracted, or in poor weather or visibility or whatever it happens to be. The car has some limitations because there's situations which confuse it. But the two of you together offer the safest driving mode, where you kind of have the best of both worlds. You have all the electronic sensors and you have the human experience, which can figure stuff out that the sensors can't. Okay, so that's how I view the driving aids in the car. Now, it's not very cold outside, so my climate system's only using between 0.5 kilowatt and 1 kilowatt. When it was colder, it would go up to about 2 kilowatts, okay? And then my power electronics right now are using 1 kilowatt. I don't know why, because normally I see that at around 0.5 kilowatt. But I'm going to turn off some of the seat heaters and parts of the car I'm not using. I'm going to turn down the fan speed. This auto function's interesting because it will tell you how quickly the car reacts to the change in temperature you ask of it. So if you normally have the climate set at 20 degrees Celsius or whatever, and it's 30 degrees outside and the ambient temperature is too hot, the car will try to cool it. Well, most cars will just blast it with full air conditioning, trying to get the temperature down to the level that you've requested as quickly as possible. But this entails, the fan speed blowing at full, which is quite loud and so on. So you may not want those climate controls and that fan speed when you get in the car, because you might be on the phone, or you might just not want the noise and are quite happy for the car to take an extra couple minutes to heat up without having to listen to the blower fan, okay? So in that instance, I can go auto, and there's 3 little pixels here, and I can set how quickly, or the aggressiveness of the climate control to set the temperature. And, I'd prefer to have a more serene driving experience without having to hear the blower motor, so I'm going to put that at 1. Okay. So we are continuing to go along. I've got all my driver aids working. The car is faithfully following this truck. I really enjoy, the car is just so quiet and so smooth. And when I want it to, it's properly fast, 0 to 100 in under 5 seconds in the sport mode. I don't really ever go out of eco. I know that I will when I want 4-wheel drive, but it's got 160 kilowatts, 220 horsepower, and the car is, I think, probably about, actually I did scale it, and I think it came to almost exactly 2,000 kilograms, if I'm not mistaken. So, 4,400 pounds. And now I've got a difficult, now the car is behaving kind of funny. Difficult 3-lane change maneuver, and I had to manually to kind of take over, and now all of the cruise controls died and my self-centering's died, so the car figures it just can't do it, okay, which is fine because it can't. All right, and I didn't hit a button, and will it reactivate the cruise control and the lane? It's not seeing anything it likes. Let's try this lane here and see if it wants to do it. And now I'm in the center. It didn't like that curb with all the brush on this side of me, but now that I changed the lanes, well, it briefly was doing it. Now it's got confused again and it's cut off. Okay, so it's, you know, it's very intermittent, you know, when you're not driving on anything but really well marked highways. Okay. 30. This car isn't, I wouldn't say, particularly aerodynamic. For one thing, it's got a lot of kind of fussy exterior details and character lines and surfacing details and stuff, none of which are particularly slippery, because, you know, the most aerodynamic shapes are going to be the ones that are smooth, and this one's got all kinds of crazy details everywhere. It does have, I think, cooling flaps that are active, that'll open only when it needs the cooling and shut the rest of the time, so that helps. But none of the kind of the zigzag, you know, Z marks on the side of the car, or the cladding, or some of the fussy, you know, front bumper treatment is going to help aerodynamics. I don't know what the CD is. You know, I'm guessing something in the high, you know, 20s, like 0.28, 0.30, something like that. The class leading EVs are, you know, 0.20, so quite a bit better than that. I'll try to find that number and put it in the slide, but I expect it's not going to be 20 or 25, 0.2 or 0.25. I suspect it's going to be closer to 30. And this car is running on 19-inch winter rubber, and it's a fairly wide tire, 255s, I think, 245s or 255s, I can't remember. But it's fairly wide tire, so that there's going to be quite a bit of friction with the wide tire, and the soft winter compound is going to give additional friction. So this is not an ideal wheel tire combination for extended range. You'd want something narrow and like a rock hard tire with low rolling resistance for the maximum range. Unfortunately, a rock hard tire for low rolling resistance will go nowhere when it's icy, so that's not a practical choice in the winter. But this car came standard on 20s for the summer, and like I said, they're fairly wide, and that isn't an ideal tire for rolling resistance. It's, you know, you need a bigger compound patch for grip, you know, which you'll need for cornering and for braking. So there's a reason to put a fat tire on a car to get more performance, but it's at the expense of rolling resistance and friction, and the amount of kilowatt hours it's going to take to overcome that friction will lead to, you know, the incremental amount to overcome the additional friction of a wide tire on a soft compound will have a negative impact on your range. Okay, so that makes sense. It's interesting that when you look at the range numbers for different manufacturers, which everybody's, you know, consumed about, you know, some manufacturers will test every car with every wheel and tire option. Some will just give one number for all the cars, or all the variants of their EV, but they'll sell that variant with many different wheel and tire combinations. So you could go buy an EV truck and go see the posted EPA number that says you're going to get so many miles of range, but then when it comes to buy it, decide you really like the all-terrain tire combination better, and then wonder why your range is 15% lower than the tire that they tested with the EPA. Okay, so you're probably better off making your own call on estimated range based on some real world results from YouTubers and your own analysis, being fully informed and educated about how drag and friction are affected by your tire choice. Okay. Ride and handling on the car are excellent. Compliance is good. The suspension, there's not a lot of suspension noise. This is a fairly rough residential road. And overall, it's very, very refined, quiet, pleasant, spacious, airy. I mean, I really do love this car. This for city driving is the best car I've ever owned by a lot. I think I really do like the combination of it, and it's a real home run, combining, you know, 400 kilometers of range and 240 kilowatts DC of fast charging, 800 volt architecture, all the latest driver aids, sensors, 5 radars, I don't know how many parking sensors, 5 cameras, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cameras, with a cabin that makes the full use of the EV skateboard platform, with a completely flat floor, really configurable seats. I've even got an ottoman or a thigh support. I can go take a nap in this car. The other thing, actually, there was one more thing that I forgot with the negatives on this car, and you know, I would have thought that it would have its own SIM card, so I could, you know, if I was charging or something like that, I could watch Netflix or whatever. And I have to tether it through my own phone if I wanted to do that, and it doesn't work that well. So the Teslas are more advanced with that. They've just got their own connectivity, and I would have a separate data account for the car if I had that. And you know, charging, when I was doing a lot of DC charging, I guess I don't really do any DC charging, but if I did a lot, that would make a really big difference, actually. So I'm surprised the car doesn't have that. I would like to see the car have that too. But overall, my list of complaints is pretty short on this car. And then for $63,000, I mean, a Model X Tesla, when I priced it out, was $105 in Canada, and the software is a little bit better. The charging infrastructure for fast charging is better. It's probably slightly more efficient because I think aerodynamically it's a slipperier shape. But this one's, I like the looks of it better. It's more distinctive. It charges faster when the charging stations are working. And the interior, like, a lot better than the Tesla, and there's more room in it. I couldn't fit our family of 5 with a 5, 7, and 9-year-old in a Model 3 Tesla. I tried; it's very cramped. But this I can. This is enough room. So I guess that I'll leave it at that. That's my drive home in the Ioniq 5. Fantastic car, and you know, it's just right now everybody thinks the same thing. It's won like every award, and it's almost impossible to buy a new one without waiting a couple of years for it. But check the Hyundai e-gmp cousins to this car. You'll never get the Kia EV6. I mean, it's probably on the shortest supply of everything. But it could be the lesser models of the Kia EV6, or most people, Genesis isn't on the radar, so you might even have better luck getting a Genesis GV70, which is again on the same platform. And Hyundai just came out with their Ioniq 6, which is aerodynamic. So if you want an Ioniq 5, but it bugs you because it's not quite as aerodynamic as it could be, well, the Ioniq 6 takes care of that, and it's a really aerodynamic shape. So it could be that maybe one of these other e-gmp cars are a little bit easier to get a hold of than Hyundai. So with that, I'll leave it. Lromanosky from Calgary, Canada. There's my review on the excellent Hyundai Ioniq 5. Thank you very much. Please like and subscribe.